Thank you, Abhishek, and hello everyone again. I'll quickly introduce Dr. Paul Novosad before we proceed with the session. Dr. Novosad is Associate Professor of Economics at Dartmouth College, USA. His research focuses on areas such as public policy, development economics, political economy, and social change. Dr. Novosad is also founder of the Development Data Lab, an open data platform that hosts analytical tools for evaluating issues in development economics. DevData Lab also hosts the SHRUG and SHRUG2, a repository of highly granular datasets covering almost all of India's towns and villages. So, Dr. Novosad, I again extend a very warm welcome to you on behalf of JPF Analytics. I'll also quickly introduce two more of our panel members today, which include Dr. Dhanannjay, who is formerly Senior Perception Engineer at NVIDIA and a member of JPF's Advisory Committee. Dr. Dev is a senior data scientist passionate about interactive data visualization and software research. Also joining our panel today is Dr. Gaurav Marathe, who is a member of our advisory committee and assistant professor at the Indian Institute of Management at Ahmedabad. His work also extends across organizational behavior, neuroscience, and the philosophy of research. So once again, welcome everyone. I'd like to start the Q&A session by asking Dr. Novosad about a question that will hopefully help us get to know him much better. What does it take to become a computational social scientist? And why did you decide to study India, of all places?
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. It's great to meet you all and hear a little bit about what you're working on. It looks like a really neat organization. Seems like you guys have marshaled a ton of volunteer effort into important work. So it's awesome. It's awesome to see. So my background, I have had a very diverse background. I studied English literature in college and have been doing nothing related to that ever since. So I worked in computer science for a few years, just as a self-taught software developer. Got interested in development economics and global inequality. And since starting my PhD in economics and economic research, I've kind of been trying to find ways that can mix those two sets of skills. I started my PhD in 2007, and I feel like this is like just at the beginning of the era where these big new digital exhaust tools like satellite imagery, cell phone data, and even like administrative data started coming online, and people in development economics have kind of cut their teeth in the design and analysis of household surveys. And so this was kind of, it felt like a new area, a new way of finding and thinking about development. Of course, in development, we're probably like, in development economics, we're, I'm sure, like well behind the use of analytic tools in industry and access to data in industry, but it's about what becomes available, right? So when government, a lot of what we do has actually not been this kind of new, exciting satellite imagery, machine learning type stuff. But it's just been getting access to digital government data. And if you look at the censuses pre-2001, a lot of them were collected with paper and pencil, and incredible data was collected from all across India. Like we've been reading data from like the 1901 and 1931 censuses, and there's these incredible data collection efforts, but the work just sits on paper in offices, and it's very hard to work with. Now every welfare payment creates a digital trail which sits on a server in some basement in the Ministry of Rural Development, and the Indian government just doesn't have the capacity internally to use this data for decision making. This is where our team has kind of come in. So I would say we're definitely not like the top-notch computer scientists in the world for thinking about data or doing machine learning or any of this kind of stuff. I'd say our comparative advantage has been a combination of like doing the grunt work to understand these administrative data sources, getting access to them, and then figuring out how to process and publicize and use them. So one of the things that we've done is we've mobilized data from the Socioeconomic and Caste Survey in 2000. This was done in 2012. So it was kind of the successor to the below poverty line survey. In 2001, Indian government surveyed every single household and handed below poverty line cards to people who were deemed below the poverty line. There were benefits and costs of doing that. A lot of things were wrong in that scheme. And so in 2012, they kind of did this new multi-dimensional poverty assessment. And we've been able to get access to this data and use it for a range of projects. And we're steadily working on making it available to the public. Essentially, you can now study development at the village level, at the town level, where historically you've only been able to look at districts with like very low coverage of districts. Like you'll sample in the old NSS surveys, you'll sample 300 households in a district, and that will be like your measure of poverty for that district. And most of the variation in poverty access to opportunities is much more granular than at the district level. Like knowing a district where poor people live is not really enough. So our team has been basically trying to make kind of the researchers' ability to see what's going on more granular and figure out what we can do at the village level, at the town level. And I think we are at the frontier of this work. We've done a bunch of really good stuff with making these kinds of things available. And I feel like we've done so little. Like there's still I'm talking about data from 2012. There's not much, like there's very little socioeconomic data available at the granular level. Since then, there hasn't been a population census, obviously, since 2011, a poverty survey since 2012. So our team is kind of thinking about how do you learn about what's going on the ground in the absence of these government survey tools. So that's kind of where we are and what the kind of motivating idea of what we work on.
There is a lot to unpack over there. But I think one of the really major themes that we were thinking about is this idea of poverty. I think Development Data Lab has enabled a lot of research around poverty as well as a lot of other areas. So I think the role that data has played in the approach that you have taken to this is really significant for an organization like us. So maybe Dhanannjay sir can take us deeper into that and follow up on the discussion on that.
Sure. So thank you, Dr. Novosad, for taking us through the motivation and the achievements from the lab. I'd like to ask more about the SHRUG initiative. Can we know more about the story of its creation? Like the achievements that we see published and we see on the open source code side are very, very impressive. And that still looks like the tip of the iceberg. So we would like to know more about the efforts and the thoughts gone behind the creation.
Yeah, so the idea of the SHRUG is that often the barrier to learning from like this world where data is plentiful. Data is now abundant, but that somehow there's like a big gap between abundant data and the ability to use that data for decision making. And what we found is that it's relatively easy to get access to some like really new, interesting source of data, like every environmental permit filed by a firm in the last 10 years in India. But then the amount of manual work required to link this to like some other characteristic, like what's going on in villages, is just really, really hard. And we noticed that all these Indian researchers, Indian and non-Indian researchers working on India are essentially duplicating this problem of trying to link data to the population censuses, link population censuses over time. And this just seems to, maybe the machines will solve this for us sometime, but right now we seem to be in the place where getting data to speak to each other just requires a huge amount of manual work and care and thinking about changing district boundaries. And there's still no accurate public village map of India. Even the maps that are sold by companies like MLinfo for like $30,000 are not like you overlay them over Google Earth and they like miss most of the villages, right? So it's just like the glue to actually work with these data is non-existent. And we had to build some of this glue and working on our own research projects, which were just focused on linking together the economic censuses. We kind of had this idea that we need a universal kind of standard or backbone for Indian data. Obviously, the best case of the world would be that the Indian government produces this and holds this and like maintains this consistently. To some extent, they do. When they run a new population census, they usually provide some kind of key for linking to the units in the prior population censuses. But it's very inconsistent. It's not their priority. So really, even though the SHRUG platform is a place where you can quickly go and get like 15 dimensions of data and download it immediately at the village and town level, the big idea is really a standard, a data standard backbone, so that any data that you bring at any administrative level that the government has worked with. You have data based on 2001 population census subdistricts. You can come to the SHRUG and you will find keys to link that to everything else in the SHRUG. And the idea is that it basically lets two researchers previously, one was working on forest cover and one was working on environmental permits, and they couldn't work together because it would take 6 months of work to figure out how their data to get their data to speak to each other. So our model is like, link your data to the SHRUG, and then you can immediately communicate with everything else out there. I don't think we're there yet. It's more a dream than a realization, but we keep trying to figure out how to make it easier for researchers to do this. And I think we're increasingly seeing data being posted with SHRUG identifiers, and even if it's not with SHRUG identifiers, we're building up the toolkit that the SHRUG will basically allow you to solve that problem much more easily than you would have been able to otherwise.
Yes, thank you. Indeed, SHRUG is coming to become a nice ecosystem where the academicians and government and think tanks can collaborate with each other. It is also impressive to see such a good quality software infrastructure coming from an academic lab. So, congratulations on that. Would you like to tell us more about the development rigor that into make such a platform?
Sorry, I couldn't understand the last part. I wonder if I understood everything up to the question.
I think he said something on the line.
Would you like to tell us more about the software development efforts, the data, or the licensing to public of not just the papers, but also and hold.
Okay, I don't know if it's me or if Dr. Dave is breaking up for everyone. Do you want to maybe put the question in the chat and I can try to take it there?
Yeah. Dr. Dave, I would request you to also reiterate the question in the chat. From what I gathered, his question was about how does the SHRUG work with different resolutions of the data, and sort of trying to more understand the process that went into the rigor when it came to developing the consolidation of this data that you were talking about.
Yeah, so this is something we constantly struggle with. So how does SHRUG work with different levels of data? In the best world, all the data is like hierarchical, right? Villages are perfectly encapsulated by subdistricts, are perfectly encapsulated by districts and then by states. And then you can just start with village level data and collapse it up to the level that you want. That is how things kind of internally work within any one round of Indian data. But then, as you know, district boundaries change a lot over time. Consolidated villages get combined into towns. And so what we're doing right now with SHRUG, and this is like, whether this is the best approach for the long run remains to be seen, but we've essentially created our own distinct units, which are consistent over time. We did this because we were interested in studying kind of the economic history and change in India from 1991 to 2011. So if two villages were combined in 1991 into a single pair of villages in 2011, then we treat them as one village the entire time. We call this unit a SHRUG, or this is a unit with a SHRUG identifier. What that gives you in the SHRUG is you can be guaranteed that every year that you observe this unit, it has the same boundaries. You're talking about the same level of population. So if you want to know if the number of jobs have changed, you don't need to worry about the fact that the unit has changed in size. Now, this approach only works if boundaries don't change too much, right? Our approach is essentially to consolidate units and make them larger and larger until we can have a consistent unit. So between 2001 and 2011, the city of Delhi essentially rotated their district map, right? They previously had, I think, like districts on the north, south, east, west axis, and now they have districts kind of on a 45-degree axis. So there's no way to use that district level data and predict exactly like which parts of districts went into which district. So using the SHRUG algorithm, we essentially said, look, we can't do anything about this. We're going to call Delhi one unit, and we're not going to be able to look at what's going on across time inside those units. So it depends a little bit. Luckily, village boundaries don't change too much. So we're doing things at the village level. It's not too bad. Towns kind of consistently expand, but they tend to not, you don't find a town in a new location. So this is kind of the idea. When we take gridded data, when we take geospatial data, we first map it. I mean, anytime we have boundaries, we just map it to those boundaries. So a lot of analytical work, a lot of geospatial work uses the grid cell as the unit of observation. We have toyed with the idea of creating a kind of gridded data set, like gridded population of the world with everything from the SHRUG. For now, we are focused, since so much of our work is with government generated data and with administrative data, we're focused on making everything work with census units. So the 2001 census village, 2001 census town, our goal is to get everything in the world down to that level. Then you have 600,000 villages, 8,000 census towns, consistent over the last 20 years, hopefully consistent over the next 15, whenever the next census runs. And it's certainly not the only model for data like this, but that is where we're at now.
Yeah. I think that's fascinating because, yeah,
Thank you.
Dr. Dave, if you want to pick it up, sure, please go ahead.
Yes, is my voice clear? Just checking.
It's in and
So
out.
next question I'd like to
yeah.
ask is about next question I'd like to ask you, like, how is SHRUG platform received by sources and different stakeholders, like the providers of data, the consumers of data, like other data scientists, other academicians?
And we've had a ton of positive feedback ever since releasing.
So after you have done such a wonderful work.
Sorry, carry on.
I think there's a bit of a lag between us
Ananya,
and
you want
Dr.
to...
Dave. No, I think we got your question, Dr. Dave, and I think Dr. Novosad was about to respond.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, we've had overwhelmingly positive feedback. Essentially, we're just creating an open product and putting tools and data into people's hands. It's been particularly fun in the research community because the returns to academic researchers for doing this thing are not really that high. There's kind of perverse incentives where often researchers want to keep their data private so they can keep publishing on that data and not get scooped. And we just realized that we are really slow at getting our papers done, and it's like we shouldn't hoard this resource in order to get 3 more papers out over the next 20 years. Like that's just really like not a good outcome. And so we decided to just push this out and hope for the best. And it's quite interesting. So I think people recognize that it's different from what like the narrow self-interest of research would seem to suggest. At the same time, we've had so much positive feedback for doing this that I think people don't do it enough. And actually, one thing that's been really neat is we've kind of promoted this open source model. We pitched this copyleft idea with the SHRUG that like if you're using the SHRUG, we expect you to also be working to improve it, to share your data with SHRUG identifiers, to make it available for other people. And a lot of young researchers in particular really buy into this model. They're like, yeah, clearly this is how science should work, where people produce public goods, they put them out for the public benefit, they let everyone else use them. And a lot of people have been posting data, and a lot of the young researchers we talk to, especially in India, are like, we love what you're doing, we are bought into this vision, and we are trying to share our data as well. So I think there's like potential for a paradigm shift in turning researchers from like public data generators as opposed to data hoarders. And so we are very much evangelists of this idea. And certainly for us, it's been hugely beneficial in terms of our reputation and just in terms of like seeing people do things with your data that you would never have thought of doing. And maybe like one of our projects that we would have done, somebody else has gotten to, and maybe we would have gotten to it in 15 years. Like I think researchers are far too worried about getting scooped. There's so many ideas out there. No one's going to steal like exactly the thing that you're working on. But there, people are nervous about doing this kind of thing. I gotta say, for us, it's been only upside.
That's really encouraging to hear, and I think it's it takes us to our question about data cultures. So as an organization, we have really made it a priority to encourage an open data culture in India as far as we can. And you also talked about working with government-generated data, and Development Data Lab is also a major contributor to open data sources. So what do you think is the current state of data cultures in India, and how do you think Indian data governance and infrastructure can be improved?
Yeah, this is a really interesting question. I don't think there's one data culture in India. Like, I think India is like big and complicated. Like, even within government, it's quite fascinating because I think there's a very lucky turn of events where a bunch of the technical staff at the NIC in India, who are the ones who like deal with the data and create the web platforms and like just do the work with this digitization, have a very high culture of openness. And they very much buy into this idea of like, whatever your village is, you should be able to go to our website, drill down to your village and see what's going on with any particular government service program in your village. And so like in the rural employment guarantee scheme, people can go download individual job cards, right? And that data is just there in the public. I think it's fantastic for transparency. I think at the higher levels, obviously we see a little more nervousness about any data that could make the government look bad. I think there's been a bunch of kind of worrying moves around the statistical bureaus, like the non-release of the NSS poverty survey. I think it was in 2017 or 2018. I think it showed like a bad outcome, which the government thought couldn't be true, and so they suppressed the survey. Now, it seems totally plausible that the results were actually erroneous, that like for whatever reason the sampling strategy oversampled poor households and the data gave the wrong idea. But if you put that idea if you put the data out, people can study it, people can back out and like understand what the biases were and even like come up with better estimates from that data. Instead, the data is just completely suppressed because of the risk that it paints kind of a negative picture. So I think there's like you have forces pushing for data transparency and forces pushing against it. I think that I think it's fantastic that at the ground level, it seems like there's a lot of demand for transparency and access to data, and I don't see that being suppressed. I mean, there are hundreds of programs, and I'm sure every story is happening for some kind of program. And then the research community, I really do feel like there's this. The people I talk to, and maybe the people who don't share this culture of open data don't talk to me, and so I don't hear about them. But most, especially young researchers that I work with, very much are bought into this culture of open data. I'm very optimistic that its access to data is going to become, that this open source model is going to continue to grow.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of sort of the government's like the other side of the coin when it comes to the government's approach to open data in India. So while on the one hand, what you described is also true, on the other hand, we also have some flagship initiatives by the government, like digital public infrastructure, where we have the unified payment interface. So we also have the government saying that they are actually trying to promote a data culture in India. So this is a sort of a tangent to our topic here, but just curious to know, do you think the push for digital public infrastructure in India right now, how do you think that will sort of tie in with the efforts that, for instance, Development Data Lab has been making?
Yeah, I guess I'm a techno optimist. I know that some people have concerns about some of the digitization, and people are worried about downsides to digital public infrastructure. I look at these investments, and it seems like overall like a very good thing. And there are a lot of researchers who are able to create partnerships and get access to things like the GST data ever since the passing of the GST law in 2018 or something, or 16, I don't remember. There's just this incredible stream of data on firm-to-firm transactions with which you can study trade and economic flows, and even like corruption and tax payment, and I think it generating. I'm very optimistic about this tool of these tools making things more digital and then thoughtfully using those digital tools to get a better understanding of what's going on. I mean, that's kind of the ethos of what we do at Development Data Lab. Obviously, there are risks associated with this as well. We're always looking and trying to build partnerships with government and private organizations that are interested in doing more with the. Often these groups are passively collecting data as part of their operations, and they don't really know how to use it for decision making, and that's kind of an area where we see ourselves as being able to help a lot. And we're always on the lookout for partnerships where we can both help people make better decisions with their data and ideally convince them to open it up in a way that's beneficial for the public. And we're involved in a few things like this as well. I can't talk about them now because I don't want to jinx them, but we have a few promising things going on in this direction.
Dr. Dave, if you would like to take it up. Oh, all right. So another thing that we were sort of wondering about when it comes to the work that's involved in Development Data Lab is there are so many themes on which Development Data Lab has worked, and they are very broad issues, such as there is judicial bias, there's segregation, there's intergenerational mobility. So could you maybe describe broadly for us what kind of work has happened and how can we creatively use data sets to answer such broad and crucial questions?
Yeah, I think we've been relatively opportunistic as researchers in the sense of like trying to answer the questions we have with the data that we can get access to. I think we're the area of interest where we have our kind of strongest area of interest, which turns out to not be our comparative advantage in data collection at this point, is understanding what's going on in cities. More and more Indians are living in cities. Access to opportunities more and more about like what happens in cities. Can people afford housing? What are public services like across neighborhoods and cities? And the data universe in India has really been overwhelmingly rural. Even the population census, like you can have a village of 50 people and it's separately cataloged as an entry in the population census. And then you have census towns with a population of 800,000, and it's just one unit, and the census is giving you zero information on what's going on within that unit. Maybe you have like ward level population counts. So I think understanding the spatial geography of cities is something that we're really interested in doing better. It's a bit of a black hole of data as well. It's hard to link data across cities. Even when cities have digital public infrastructure, it's often a different package of tools in one city versus another. So it's difficult to compare them. But I think that this is like figuring out how to solve this problem of getting better vision into what's going on in cities, in neighborhoods, in urban infrastructure is just an area that would have really high returns. So our paper on residential segregation is kind of the first cut at that. We were able to, we're kind of lucky enough that the 2013 economic census and the 2012 socioeconomic caste census used the same enumeration block codes to guide their enumerator. So an enumerator who's going to collect data is given like a set of 50 households that they need to interview over the course of one day. And these are not like official codes or anything, but out of convenience, all these surveys use the same set because they've created these block codes for the population census. Everybody else used these ones. So we're able to provide this really fine-grained view into some aspects of what's going on at the neighborhood level. But then we're like really limited by like the 5 questions that they asked on the survey. So if you read our segregation paper, I think we learned a lot about what's going on within cities, which would have been completely impossible to learn in the absence of this data. But you'll also read it and you'll end up with another 15 questions about like what is the quality of these public services? Why are they different? Are these what about private infrastructure versus public infrastructure? And the data is just not there to answer that. So I think this is an area where I don't think we have a clear path forward, but it seems like there's a really high return to figuring out how to get better data from what's going on in cities rather than just like average wages in Hyderabad. don't know how useful like that statistic is if you want to understand what's going on, you know, at the city level. And really cities are where development is going to happen or not happen in India is my view. Like making cities succeed is going to be far more important than what's going on in villages.
Thank you for taking us through the motivation and processes. My next question I'd like to ask about the Development Data Lab when it's working. How is the typical day? How does a typical day look like?
I mean, I have a side job as an associate professor at Dartmouth. So my typical day right now, since I'm in a teaching quarter, involves meeting with students almost all day long. I'm teaching a seminar class, so students are writing their first major original empirical research project. So that's occupying me right now. We have a team of about 10 people. We have a mix of data scientists and research associates. So our research associates are people who tend to be on their way to PhDs between their bachelor's and their PhD applications. And as much as possible, we try to give them research projects and let them get as much ownership over these research projects as they can. And we essentially employ them as grad students. They don't quite have the skills of like second or third year grad students, but we try to develop those skills and encourage people to move forward with their projects. So if you look at most of our recent projects, almost all of them have a pre-doc as a co-author, and that pre-doc is kind of really leading the project and doing as much leadership of it as they can, getting everything done on it, and then we're there to kind of steer them in the right direction, help solve problems. And then this is kind of new in the last couple of years that we've been able to hire a data science team, and the data science team works on things like the SHRUG platform. Obviously, like if you've visited the SHRUG platform, this is much more than just like posting a bunch of CSV files to the internet. We're really trying to do the work to make these data usable, understandable to people without technical expertise, and as kind of make this stuff as helpful and usable as possible for everyone in the research community. So that's our data scientists both like work on collecting new data sources and also work on taking what we've done and seeking an audience for it that's much bigger than just the economics journals.
Nice, thank you. So considering the sensitivity of the impact when you publish certain insights, do you have internal processes to keep track of credibility or accuracy of the data?
Yeah, I would say as a economic researcher, you have to develop you have to be very, very careful and check each result like 20 times. And we kind of have internal processes as we do builds like unit tests. Data analysis, I think, much harder in that dimension than say developing software. Because if you're developing an iPhone app, you know if you've made a mistake because the app doesn't perform as expected. But when you're doing data analysis, you just get a result. And if you've made a mistake, you get the wrong result, but there's not necessarily anything there that tells you that you got the wrong result. So this is one of the things that we teach our undergrads, that we teach our pre-docs, that we teach PhD students, is just developing a process where you check every variable that you work with every which way, like study outliers, run internal validity checks, have someone else look at your code. So we spend a lot of time thinking about this. I'd say it's probably an area where probably even more formalization of error checking would be valuable. Ultimately the research, the academic research process does have institutional mechanisms for error checking, in that if you write an important paper that people care about a lot, you publish your data, you publish your code, other people can replicate it, you can try to see whether it holds up. So I feel comfortable that over like the 5-year, 10-year horizon, the invalid estimates of important things will mostly be overturned. In the short run, is it possible that people write papers which are sometimes wrong? I mean, it happens, and we really don't want it to happen. So we spend a lot of effort trying to trying to prevent that. But it's inevitable that nothing. So far I haven't seen a path to like preventing mistakes some of the time.
That's really fascinating.
Like,
I think
yeah.
we give, yeah, Dr.
Yeah.
Dev, please go ahead.
Thank you, Dr. Paul. I think this last 40 minutes listening to you was really joy. I mean, understanding, you having the English background and then moving and doing such kind of phenomenal work is absolutely mind-blowing. So to conclude, entire discussion, I think I would like to shift from a data to a person behind it. And a kind of a question, I mean, we got a lot of insight about a philosophy of a data, the way you collect, how we should approach at the data, how everybody should build over each other data, entire idea of making your data open and taking that risk, which we think a bit about our own careers vis-a-vis everybody able to use that data and produce a good scientific research. So we could also know about your philosophy. We could see about your passion. So, kind of making all these things together and asking the person behind all these things, which would help us to get more inspiration. If you can speak a little bit about a passion where, how it began. I mean, that point where you shifted from English to, developmental economics and that to a data, I think exactly that a moment of aha or wow when you came here, the first question. Second, in this entire work, what is your philosophy to look at data and science? And therefore, how you see your mission henceforth? That can give us some inspiration and ideas.
Okay, that's a very, very expansive question, which I'm not at all prepared to answer. But let me see what I can do. I guess like I have been lucky to grow up I grew up in Calgary in Canada, immigrant parents, but they were both engineers. We had like a very comfortable lifestyle. And when I first did some traveling around the world in my undergrad, I just had, it was like very eye-opening to see how much of the world just didn't have the set of opportunities that I had. And I just kind of feel like, we spend, this is like very cliche, but we don't spend that many years on this planet, and I want to spend mine doing something that's worthwhile. And so I think probably sometimes I'm overly questioning of the value of what I'm doing, but I want to figure out how I can spend my time doing the most with the skills that I have. And even in academic research, I question this a lot, whether I should like spending my time responding to referee reports. Is this really a good use of the few hours that I have? To that end, I feel much more proud of what we've done with Development Data Lab and with SHRUG than I do about any of our research papers. I feel like we've done something entrepreneurial, original, which really wouldn't exist if we weren't here working on it. But I'm definitely very much asking myself for every research project that we work on, like how does this make anyone better off other than myself? And I'm not too attached to any. I'm pretty comfortable in my career now, and my kids are grown up, so I don't need to like fight for the next academic laurel. I just want to think about like what can I work on that has some kind of lasting impact. So that's I don't get very motivated by like playing the status games. I find that very like discouraging, and it's like a very depressing part of academia for me. So I try not to play those games, and it's every time I talk to someone who's like excited about using SHRUG and is able to do something with it that they wouldn't have been able to do otherwise, that like means far more to me than getting another site for one of my papers. So that's what I find exciting about it.
Yeah, Dr. Paul, I think to listen to this meeting, it was really, really beautiful. I mean, I hope we get some fire from it. I think now that we are coming to the end of the session, first of all, we'd like to express our deep gratitude to take your time out and spend time with us, kind of giving us feel, which will help us JPF Analytics Foundation to kind of move forward in a more meaningful direction. And we hope we would be in touch more. I mean, because about India more than us. and that also shows somewhere at a data level. So we will definitely like to build, this partnership where we can contribute more, and we can help the India to see at a policy level some evidence-based insights. If you are okay, we will request all participants to switch on their cameras, and we can have one group photos with you.
Yeah, while people are switching their cameras on, I'll just thank you for the chance to talk to you. It's great to meet you, hear about your work, and I'll be excited to see what you guys are producing, and happy to chat about solving data problems anytime. And I think in this new open source world, we can very much benefit from each other's work.